I am so excited to see the film that has been put together by NFL Films that ties into the Giants' 100th year as a franchise, but also tells the story of a true football life. The film itself is called The Duke, The Giant Life of Wellington Mara. It premieres on the NFL Network Friday night at 8 p.m., and it'll definitely exist in other platforms thereafter. But I think Wellington Mara is one of the most interesting men in all of sports history, and certainly one of the bedrocks of the NFL. And to discuss this film, which I've caught early glimpses of and seems incredible, I'm bringing on the filmmaker. It's a producer at NFL Films. He's also incredibly talented at what he does. Mr. Neil Zender, welcome to the season with Peter Schrager.
Oh, great to be with you, Peter. Thanks a lot.
Neil, I am a Giants fan from when I was a child. I could say that openly. My dad raised me as a Giants fan. Of course, my allegiance with teams has waned a little bit as I become a journalist and I cover all 32. But Wellington Mara's place in NFL history is perhaps more important than any other figure from the early days to where the NFL went. A visionary, but also an incredible life lived. This project, I have to imagine, was in the works for years, but when the Giants announced they were celebrating the 100th year, there had to be some impetus to let's really tell the story of this man. Can you tell us the genesis of doing a film on Wellington Mara, whose life we'll get into throughout this podcast?
Well, one of the great mysteries to us is why has there never been a film made about Wellington Mara, who is such an immensely important historical figure. You know, there's a great quote by Winston Churchill where somebody said to him at one point, "How do you think history is going to treat you?" And Winston Churchill said, "It's going to treat me great because I'm going to be the one who's going to write it." And he wrote book after book after book and put his own spin on history and why he was so important in that. And Wellington Mara, almost unlike just about every other great historical figure in regular history or football history, never did that. He never beat his chest. He never said, "Look at me." He never said, "Look at all the important things that I've done." And for that reason, nobody has ever made a film about Wellington Mara or really told you how important he is to the NFL and to football and everything else. And everybody just sort of thought with the Giants turning 100, it was about time that somebody did it. And it's really amazing because, you know, when Wellington Mara was born, the National Football League did not exist, and football was not a big thing. And over the course of his lifetime, and when he died, it was the biggest cultural thing in sports in our country. And he's sort of like Forrest Gump. Like, you look at almost every major thing that happened that made the NFL into the thing that we all know and love and is such a big part of our lives, and he was the person that did it. I mean, why is the Duke written on the NFL football? The Duke's written in the NFL football because that was his nickname, and he was the person who went and negotiated the contract with Wilson to make the footballs and was the first person who did that for the league. And George Halas said, "Man, Wellington's doing such a smash bang up job. Let's just put his name on the ball." And that's what they did. And there's story after story after story like that about just sort of the, you know, formation and creation of the NFL, that he was there like whatever Lin-Manuel Miranda says, he was in the room where it happened, and a lot of times he was the person in the room making it happen, but he cared more about the result than taking the credit for it. And that's why, unfortunately, he has not really gotten the credit he deserves for everything that he's done for all of us.
I consider myself a historian, and I think one of the great books in NFL lore is I don't know the title. Michael McCambridge did The Story of Lamar Hunt. And it was like, let's go deep on Lamar Hunt and what he did for the AFL, but also what Lamar Hunt did for sports as a whole. And it's this incredible gift to an individual who had never written his own book. In this case, though, Wellington Mara has this incredible portion of his life, and we'll get into it, where he wrote letters. He wrote letters because he was at war and he was serving in World War II. Now, look, he wasn't drafted. He didn't go there as an 18-year-old. He went when he was 25 years old and was already a key figure of the NFL's New York Giants, and decided it was his duty to go overseas, enlisted himself, and then has this treasure trove of letters where he's writing letters back home about being under siege and searching for men at sea. Like, the fact that you have this military portion of his life when he could have just coasted, I think that is a measure of a man. It's incredible.
So sort of what happened is everybody knew that he was in the war, in World War II, but he never talked about it. And after he died, his daughter Susan was cleaning out the attic and just found a shoebox full of letters. And they were all his letters from the war to his parents and to his brother. A lot of them are, he was in the USS Randolph in the Pacific, and the USS Randolph was it was one of the first aircraft carriers. It was a very important carrier to the entire island hopping strategy that Halsey used to win the war in the Pacific in World War II. So like Wellington Mara was there at Iwo Jima. Wellington Mara was there at Okinawa on an aircraft carrier. He was a radar operator. And to understand what he did, we had Phil McConkey, who was at the Naval Academy. He sort of went through some of the letters. Like people have seen before the letters to do with, like he'd write home about football, and we just saw this guy playing whatever on an island. Like he'd be great. Like let's get him after the war. But we focused more on the actual war. Like Phil McConkey went through for us some of the actual war combat stuff, because like a lot of people in World War II, he didn't talk about what he went through. And he was basically what, nowadays in the military, they would call a drone ranger. He would sit there on the radar and look at the dots, and he would tell the pilots where the Japanese pilots were, and he would send them in to go shoot them down. And you can, tell from the letters, he describes it like, I directed the pilot to go to this exact spot, and they rendezvoused there, and they shot down a plane, and I personally feel like I killed a man. Which, in the World War II generation, nobody sort of talked about that stuff. But it also had, I think, real profound implications for his relationships with other people. He was a great friend all his life with Tom Landry. And spoken or unspoken, part of that bond with Tom Landry was a World War II Flying Fortress B-17 pilot who flew 29 missions over Europe, and Wellington Mara saw all this action in the Pacific, and they would have dinner every night before the Giants and the Cowboys would play each other and act like they were all great, and then try to kill each other the next day. But the relationship sort of transcended the football, which I think is hard in today's NFL for people to really do. But back, when Bill Parcells calls him a patriarch. When you're a patriarch, like the NFL wasn't this big giant thing to Wellington Mara. It was just people. It was just people that he knew and had relationships with, and everything was personal.
There's these letters. I've done the work. I've listened to John Mara, who's the current owner, and of course, the Mara family has read some of these letters. One of them's like, Dear Jack, he's writing home. He's like, Dear Jack, he's like, this might not be good. We might not make it tomorrow, but if you hear from me and the Japanese don't see me, we're going to be all right. But if they do, this is this is where we're at, and it will not be good for us. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they have these letters of him the night before a major attack. Like they have that. And this is a guy who then in the same letter is talking about the NFL draft, because he's writing home about he's doing work on the draft. And I've got my lists. Like he was still contributing to the football team.
And how many people want you to know that they were the first to do something? Like the draft went on for 5 or 6 years. He was the first person that said, like we all do when we play fantasy football, you know what, I'm going to have a cheat sheet. I'm going to have a list. And he typed it out. I'm going to have a list of the top prospects, 1 to 250. And he typed that whole thing out. And then he went to the draft, and nobody else had it in 1939. And he was like, golly, this will be a better event if everybody else knows what they're doing instead of just me. So he made copies, and they put up, and he shared his cheat sheet with everybody. And you had these, other owners didn't know what they were doing. They were just picking off Wellington Mara's cheat sheets for years at the NFL draft because they couldn't see what it could be, but he could, Or he's one of the first people to shoot game film. He got a 16 millimeter film camera for Christmas in 1935 or 1936. He's like, you know what? I'm not just going to make movies in my buddies, like in my family, like let me shoot some football games and give it to Steve Owen and let him break it down as a coach. Can that help him?
The early stuff, I mean, NFL Films has incredible archives, but like, do you guys have footage of Ray Flaherty and Mel Hine? Like, do you have that stuff?
We don't have. I mean, the interesting thing is we don't have a lot of that. Our stuff really starts in the full on in the 60s, and then we have a decent amount of stuff in the 40s and the 50s. But it's usually just a top camera that's far away. One of the things that we found in the course of doing the research for this was, the Giants were able to dig up all these film cans that in a lot of cases were film that Wellington Mara himself had shot. So
unbelievable.
So we have ground footage that Wellington Mara shot at the Polo Grounds in the late 20s, early 30s. Like, on that one roll of film that he shot is more ground footage than we have from that entire era up until this time period. And like our shooters like looked at it and they could not believe like how rock steady he was, and there wasn't any shake, and he like with the camera that he was shooting on, like he could have shot for NFL Films. Like he's a very good. But the other neat thing in this documentary is, we've got his home movies. So there's Wellington Mara with Vince Lombardi vacationing in Hawaii. There's Wellington Mara and Vince Lombardi, and he's recording their golf swing so they can figure out, why their handicap's 9 instead of 3.
And that's when Lombardi was coaching for the Giants, or after he'd already left and gone to the Packers?
That's when he's with the Packers. But it's just like, if you were to Wellington Mara, if you were to isolate any of the one single thing that he did, like the 50 things that he done, if you just isolate one of them, you'd say that's a Hall of Fame football life. I mean, like he went to college and was a classmate at Fordham with Vince Lombardi, and so he went to Jim Lee Howell when they hired him as head coach and said, we're going to hire you as the head coach, but I really, really, really think you should hire Vince Lombardi as your offensive coordinator. And I really, really think this defensive back of ours, Tom Landry, should be in charge of the defense. And so what's Jim Lee Howell going to say? Multiple times Vince Lombardi went to Wellington Mara and said, like, I'm fed up. I'm not going to get a head coach. Like, I want to quit. I'm going to go coach in college. I can be a head coach in college somewhere. And Wellington Mara said, don't quit. Don't quit. Like, don't.
Wow.
Like, he talked him out of multiple times. Vince, one of the things that's, the documentary goes into great length is Vince Lombardi showed up, and he came from Army, and he coached for Red Blake at Army. And Army had a system where, unlike anybody else, they would take Polaroid photographs of the formations before the snaps. And Lombardi said, I'd like to do this. Can we do this with the Giants? There was no apparatus. Wellington Mara said, well, I'll do it. I'll take the pictures. Oh. So you had the owner of the team with the Polaroid camera sitting up in the press box, taking Polaroid pictures before every snap. At the end of the series, he'd take all the photos, wrap them up into a sock, stick some either rocks or a cleat in the sock, and throw it from the upper deck down onto the field. Lombardi pick it up and then go through it and go show Frank Gifford and Charlie Connerly what was going on. And Wellington Mara loved to do that because he had a role and he was helping the team and he didn't need any attention for doing it or anything else. But that's where you see all the coaches with the Surface tablets today. That's where it started. Because Wellington Mara and Vince Lombardi did that because they wanted to figure out a way for the Giants to beat the Cleveland Browns.
All right, so big picture. Dad is the owner of the Giants. He's born. He's working for the team in a bunch of different roles, ball boy, all the stuff. Goes and has a big role at the team, then goes into war, then comes back, eventually takes over the team. I'm watching the trailer for your film, which I cannot wait to see, and you've got contributions from Parcells, from Strahan, who calls him Forrest Gump. You've got contributions from Ernie Accorsi, and then I see Roger Goodell as well. So if you're taking the Forrest Gump analogy, he literally touches every era of the NFL up until his death.
So what we sort of did, instead of just being chronologically and starting at the beginning of his life and ending at the end of his life, we sort of focused on all the different things he did that made the NFL great. And there's a different giant who shows you that and shows you a side of them that they got to see. So one of the really cool things was, when we started researching this, we looked at the footage from Wellington Mara's funeral, and Michael Strahan walks out, and he's like speechless. He's like, well, I knew he was our owner, and I knew he was a great guy, and I loved him, but I didn't know all the things he did for the NFL. So we called up Michael Strahan and said, well, you want to go talk to Roger Goodell, and he'll tell you all the stuff that Michael Strahan was like, yes, let's go, let's do it. Eli Manning, who Ernie Accorsi traded for, he sort of does a deep dive into, the draft stuff, and Wellington Mara was one of the pioneers of scouting the NFL. He was considered the, Bill Polian of the 1930s.
Yeah.
Wellington Mara is the person who built the 50s Giants, like his scouting system, and he selected all those players. So Eli Manning sort of goes through all his personnel stuff and how he created how teams prepare for the draft and all that stuff. You know, we had Phil Simms, who sort of took us to Wellington Mara, by our count, went to over 1,000 games in person, 1,000 Giants games in person, all the home games, all the road games. And so he lived so long. Like, he had 3 homes. Most of us, like, the stadium's the stadium for, like, our entire life, and then we're whatever we feel when they switch to a new stadium after, like, 30 years. Well,
yeah.
He was at the Polo Grounds, and he was at Yankee Stadium, and he was at Giant Stadium. He was getting ready for MetLife at the point in his life when he died. Like, so he had all these different – so Phil Simms went to every one of his stadiums.
That's cool.
And sort of went and showed you what it was like when he was there. Like, when they were in the Polo Grounds, it was below the water table, so that it was constantly swampy and muddy and it rained all the time. Like, and football was starting. They didn't know what they were doing. So his dad, Tim Mara, at one point, Wellington Mara's father, he bought rain insurance so that they would get a rebate if fans didn't show up and buy tickets because there was so much rain. And like they had to start after the baseball Giants season was over, so they were always like starting their home season in like late October. And then Wellington Mara said, like, they never got to – what they discovered was they could never collect. The insurance policy said when you get an eighth of an inch of rain, they would get like it would rain all day. They still could collect. The insurance company would still weasel out of it. And then we had Tiki Barber, who was probably the coolest thing. He sort of talked about the relationships that Wellington Mara had with all the players. And it's incredible, his relationship with Lawrence Taylor and the things he did for Lawrence Taylor.
I was going to say,
Taylor
because
was like
we're
the
watching
greatest
the
character
clip
you could ever have. Like, he's just Wellington Mara is the greatest guy I ever knew. Like, he backed me up in every situation, even when he shouldn't. He was always like there for me. Phil Simms tells this incredible, you know, a lot of people remember how when Phil Simms left the Giants, like, that was right when the salary cap was coming in. He was one of the first salary cap casualties.
Crazy.
And, you know, we think of Wellington Mara as not being emotional. Well, he reacted emotionally behind the closed doors when
that
the
was a
Giants
press
released
conference,
Phil
because
Simms.
I was a kid. I remember that press conference. Simms in a sweater sitting up there, and it was like, where's he going to go? Is he going to go to the Arizona Cardinals? And if I'm not mistaken, that was it for Phil Simms. Did he play anywhere else?
No, he basically was he signed with the Browns, but then he was hurt, so he just ended up not playing. But I mean, like, Phil Simms is like, Wellington Mara was going to like fire everybody. He was like completely out of control upset because Phil Simms, you know, once a Giant, always a Giants. Like, Phil Simms, like, he believed players should be Giants for life, and he sort of, even if they left, they were still Giants for life.
You mentioned LT, and I mean, I have heard so many stories over the years, some of them from LT. I emceed the Giants 100-year event along with Bob Papa back in June, and LT was backstage telling stories. And I mean, Wellington Mara not only put up with a lot of LT's stuff off the field, and you know, obviously we know LT lived it fast when he was a player, but also they would like golf together. And they would spend holidays together. And like, Wellington Mara took LT in as more than just a top pick who was one of the greatest defensive players of all time. He loved him for all his warts and bruises, and played with him in a professional but also personal way.
It's incredible. And you know, Tiki Barber and, you know, Jeremy Shockey were incredibly close to him, and it's amazing for somebody who's 80 years old to be able to really connect with somebody who's 22 years old. Mm-hmm. If that was something he was able to do. Like, if you look at his life, right, he started out and he's 9 years old and he's sitting on the bench in the Polo Grounds next to Jim Thorpe and Red Grange or whatever, and like, they're like gods to him and heroes. And then he got to the point where, hey, they're the same age as I am, and they're like peers and contemporaries. And then he got to the point where, like, okay, this is the 50s Giants, and I'm sort of like a father figure to like Frank Gifford and Sam Huff.
Tittle.
And then he's a grandfather, and, you know, then he's a patriarch. And he went through all these sort of different stages of life in his relationships with the players. And it's a pretty, you know, I mean, the other thing that's amazing is, like, because the NFL was such a small and insignificant thing, you know, his dad gave him and his brother Jack operational control of the Giants in like 1930.
Yeah.
So, like, picture being, you know,
30 years old,
15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
And you're in charge, like, you're in charge of an NFL team. Like, he got to do that. Everything that we'd all dream of doing, he, like, got to do that. And the amazing part is, like, he could handle it. Like, how many people could, how many people could actually handle it?
And then still says, I'm going to enlist and go to war. Like, 'cause that's
right.
my duty to my country.
Yeah.
Like, here's this silver spoon. I've got this amazing thing. And it's like, no. Like, my priorities are still intact, which is incredible.
And that was also, they tried to, like, hey, we could send you, we can send you here, we can send you, no, I want to go.
Put me in the belly of the beast. Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
I love the book, The GM, and it's about a Corsi in that year, and they really do chronicle the 2007 Giants, how it all comes to be. And in that book, and I haven't seen your doc in full yet, I've only seen clips, the trainer, Ronnie Barnes, is by Wellington's side every day in the hospital. I still tear up thinking about it. Like the team trainer, an African-American man who the owner hired before that was done and is now by his bedside as he's passing away. Like, do you capture any of that stuff in the film?
We talk about the end of his life. Ronnie Barnes is in the film, and Ronnie Barnes talks a lot about his relationships with people and how he treated people and what his philosophy, in life was. It's also worth pointing out when you look at Wellington Mara, everybody says, how did the NFL get integrated? How does that story get told in history? Well, hey, the Los Angeles Rams did it. Well, with Kenny Washington and Woody
Kenny
Strobel.
Washington, sure.
Well, the thing is, the Rams did it because the Los Angeles Coliseum said, as a condition for you to get a lease at the Coliseum and move from Cleveland to Los Angeles, you have to integrate your team. We're not going to have a segregated team playing in our team. So, like, they sort of did it with a lot of pressure to do it. When Paul Brown integrated the Cleveland Browns and brought in Bill Willis and Marion Watley, they were in the, a rival league, the AFC. They were not in the NFL.
Yeah.
When Wellington Mara picks up Emlyn Tunnell, like, he picked him up because I want Emlyn Tunnell
damn good
to play for my team to help them win. So that's really a milestone that doesn't get talked about enough. And Emlyn Tunnell was, also from the moment he was on the Giants, like, he was a Giant. He was an assistant coach. Like, he was a Giant for life and a really, really, really important part of the franchise, and that's the type of person that Wellington Mara was in a time when not everybody thought like that.
Who were the other owners of that generation? Obviously, we know the families, but who were some of the lead voices? And of course, if you want to go to Burt Bell and whoever else in the NFL side, but like, who were the voices that really were of great influence during that era?
So, really in the 40s and the 50s and the early 60s, you're talking about Burt Bell. You're talking as the commissioner who used to own the Philadelphia Eagles. You're talking about George Halas. You're talking about George Preston Marshall in Washington, and Dan Reeves in Los Angeles. Those were the people that were really,
Are they worth?
To a large degree, Paul Brown really spoke for the Cleveland Browns, even though he's a minority.
Is that group? I know we always talk about, what are they called? The AFL ones, the
Foolish Club.
The Foolish Club. Like, are the NFL owners? Are they worth a closer look as you were doing your research and putting this doc together? Like, we got all these different. Look back at time, the way that the NFL came together and those voices working together to launch this thing. Is that worth another look?
Well, we get into part of that. One of the most significant things that it was sort of a two-step thing, but one of the most significant things that Wellington Mara did, you talk about the letters, he kept detailed records. He has notes from NFL league meetings. Like, one of the things we saw that was really cool was he showed the profit and loss of the NFL teams in 1956, and the team with the biggest profit, Detroit, made like $112,000. Some teams were losing $30,000. So nobody's making any money in 1956. Burt Bell, the commissioner, he's running the league out of his house in Narberth, Pennsylvania. That's where the league office was located, was his house. He had an office in Philadelphia. We never really went there, and it was a little tiny office. And when Burt Bell dies in 1959, and they need a new commissioner, nobody can agree on who it should be. Now, George Preston Marshall is very adamant that the league office needs to move from Philadelphia to New York because that's where the wire services are, that's where the television networks are, that's where the advertisers are. If the NFL is going to become a league where teams make more than $112,000 as a team an entire year, they need to be in New York. Well, all the people they want to hire, they don't want to move to New York. So they have to find someone else. And they go through 23 ballots. And Wellington Mara is the person who says, I think we should pick Pete Rozelle. Now, Pete Rozelle at that time, and this
What was his role? What was
Pete Rozelle was the general manager of the Los Angeles Rams.
Huh.
And his claim to fame was when he'd taken over the Rams, they were a team that had played the championship game, and now they were like a 2 or a 3-win team. He'd done the equivalent of what was the Herschel Walker trade of his year. He traded for a running back named Ollie Matson, who was incredible, but he traded 9 players for him.
Wow.
And the Rams were just getting worse and worse and worse, but he was a very, very good marketer. But Wellington Mara said, let's go with Pete Rozelle, and pushed him through. And then something that everybody had always wanted to do, but nobody had been able to get it done, was how can we have a national TV contract instead of each team making their own individual team contracts?
Interesting.
And Wellington Mara said,
that's Mara?
I'll do it, and I'll help you do it, Pete Rozelle, and I'll propose it, and I will I'll share the money equally. Let's do revenue sharing, because the whole problem
had that been done before in any sport.
Was right. Green Bay's making $20,000, $10,000 on a TV contract, and New York's making $400,000. Wellington Mara said, let's just do one big contract that Pete Rozelle negotiates, and we'll spread all the money equally. And if he hadn't have done that, there'd be no Green Bay and there'd be no Kansas City, and there would only, the NFL would be like Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
But because Wellington Mara, in the biggest market with the most valuable team, said, I'll share revenue, just like he shared his cheat sheet at the draft because it was for the good of the league, then everybody else sort of had to get in line and do it whether they wanted to or not. And that's really, economically, that's the foundation of all of the NFL's success, is Wellington Mara's willingness to do that.
A couple of years ago, I'm flipping through my channels, and I love documentaries, and I ended up watching like a 2-hour documentary on John Cazale, the actor who is only in 5 movies. All 5 movies were nominated for Best Picture or won Best Picture, and he's in The Godfather. Obviously, he's Fredo. Eventually passes away at 42, and then 30 years later they make a documentary about him. And I came away thinking, like, wow, what a gift to his family. This is how I feel about this. Wellington Mara has been dead for close to 20 years now, and yet there hadn't been the love letter to Wellington Mara and what he had done put on film yet. Have you heard from John Mara? Have you heard from the Mara family about this gift you've just provided their family for legacies and for generations to come?
I think they're happy with it, but I think the thing everybody wants is for football fans to be able to sort of see all the things that he did that maybe don't realize it, and also just, I think, Wellington Mara sort of put his personality or identity into the Giants, and it's in so many places in the league that maybe we all don't realize. And then when I first moved to the East Coast, I joined a fantasy football league, and I'll never forget there was a rabid, foaming at the mouth Eagles fan who would go berserk every week when they were playing the Cowboys. But in fantasy football, he said, well, I see myself as a Wellington Mara type owner.
I love that fantasy football.
I was just like I was really taken by the fact that this is an Eagles fan who hates the Giants, but in his mind, what an owner was supposed to be was Wellington Mara.
I love this.
I think you would find people like that in every NFL city, who instinctively understood that what Wellington Mara, represented, and the fact that it was always the team above himself. I think that actually meant a heck of a lot to people, even though maybe everybody hasn't always said that really loudly.
I have a heck of a lot of things to say about some of the current owners and some of their behavior, but I guess it's better off, considering we all work for the NFL, to just leave it at that. Wellington Mara was always a gentleman. We'll just say that. You didn't see him doing a lot of media. You didn't see him out there. You didn't see the story being about him. If anything, he was in the background, and it's such a gift that you have put this together with your team at NFL Films. Real quick, as we wrap, when can we see it? Now, I know you got an unlucky draw here with the Yankees playing the Dodgers Friday night. That said, as is always the case with these NFL films, they live on forever, and you're going to discover it. But where can we see it first, and then where will it live from that point on?
It's going to premiere on NFL Network at 8 p.m. on Friday, October 25th. And then the Giants are going to be showing the heck out of it, and NFL Network will be showing it quite frequently.
Can't wait. Neil, what a gift you've put together. I am so excited that this is finally coming out. I've been hearing about it for months, and this was a really cool conversation. I think our podcast, we talk to a lot of coaches and GMs, but a true NFL fan appreciates Wellington Mara, and a true NFL fan is going to listen to this conversation and then go watch the film. Appreciate your time, man. Congratulations. What a gift.
Well, that's great. Thanks a lot, Peter. Really appreciate it.